This conference will now be recorded.
Hello. Again, my name is Adam Schultz. I'm the Digital Media Manager here at ATP. With me, I have Liz Quinn, who is our Online Learning Specialist. Say hi, Liz.
Hello.
And I also have David Holloway here at ATP. Basically, today's training session is going to be about 40 to 50 minutes. Basically, we're going to run through at a relatively high level all of the features of the CMS. There's a lot of them, and basically, from a very high level, we're going to be looking at sort of the basic functionality of how to run a synchronous or asynchronous class on the CMS. And then once we cover sort of that high level, we can, if there's time at the end, we'll dive down into kind of how exactly you're looking to use this for your chapter and see if we can address some specific strategies that you can use to leverage the CMS. As I tell all chapters, the hardest part of the CMS is kind of determining how best to use it with your chapter's program. It's very flexible. There's lots of different options. There's lots of different settings. So we're going to be looking at it as it comes sort of out of the box, but there's lots of customization options once we start getting into it that we can look at. Okay? And also, if you guys have any questions, Bob or anybody else on the call, please feel free to interrupt me, and I can spend more time on particular options or features when we're there. Okay?
Fantastic.
Awesome. So the classes to start off with are typically divided by class year and by instructor. Each class is sort of its own entity. And basically, each instructor typically has their own roster of students that are attached to them. Basically, any changes that an individual instructor only will affect their class, or any activities that apply to their class will only affect their class and will not affect anybody else in the system. Okay? What we're looking at right here on the screen is the first year CMS template. This is kind of how everything looks when you first enter it. We're going to be looking at this everything as if you were an instructor, but I'll jump into some of the other roles a little bit later on so you can see that the students will actually see some different things later on. The first thing you'll notice is that up at the top, there is a bunch of information, supplemental information that you can use straight off, and that includes things like class news and announcements, which we'll talk about here in a second, as well as some instructor materials. You'll see that the instructor materials are grayed out, so including the test banks for the 2019-2020 school year. These will always be updated for the current year. One other thing is that the system is set to Central Time, although everybody has the opportunity to change the time in their profiles, and I believe they're also asked for the time setting when they first register for an account. Okay? When a chapter first requests a class, basically they'll give us how many classes of each type that they'll need. So, for example, 3 first-year classes, 2 second-year classes, 2 third-year classes, and then they'll also tell us who the instructors are and how many students are approximately going to be enrolled in each class. So basically, Bob, if you're an instructor, you're going to be sent some credentials via email that will tell you how to log into the system. And the main URL for the system is ieci.atplms.com. okay?
Okay.
You'll notice when you first go there, there's a learner portal and an instructor portal. The only time that students or you will ever use the learner portal is if you're taking a class as if you're a student. So for example, if you're participating in the instructor training, possibly the IC leadership or any of the ESTS classes, if you're participating as a student, you'll be visiting the learner portal, and we'll talk about how students gain access to that in a little bit. Otherwise, you're going to log in using the instructor login.
Got
okay?
it.
All your classes will be listed to the left, though if you have, and also once you log in, they'll be listed down below. Though if you've been teaching for a while, you might actually end up with quite a long list of classes, and you can click all courses to see all of the courses that you're enrolled in, okay? Once you actually click to go to your class, we see that we talked a little bit about the introduction, but the main meat of the course is if you scroll down and you can see all of the lessons from the electrical apprenticeship curriculum are stored in these gray boxes. And these gray boxes can be opened up by clicking them. We have a short introduction that basically talks a little bit about, at a very high level, how students can use the system. But after that, all of the content within each of the lesson modules follow the electrical apprenticeship curriculum. We've actually copied a number of pieces from the student manual into the system. That includes the purpose, the homework, and the objectives. You'll also notice that there's a button here for the IEC manual, student manual web book. If you click this, or if students click this, it will actually take them to a digital version of the book. This is the full book here. It's not just the chapter, but it will basically hyperlink them to the lesson that they're looking at, okay?
Let me ask you a question real quick. If you were to access that like you are right now, can that can that read to you? Does it have an audio file?
No, there is no audio file, but I know that there's been a conversation about an audio version of the student manual, and that is being discussed at the national level. There's some complications there in terms of like reading formulas and talking about charts and things like that. So they're trying to handle that at the national level currently.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Jumping back, also in the materials that are offered with each lesson are supplemental materials. Now, these are supplemental materials out of the box. This is we intend this to be a starting point. Basically, there's a number of videos that we've identified from ATP content that go with the lesson material. We also have review materials, which includes a review presentation, which, surprise, are the PowerPoints from the official apprenticeship curriculum material, and students can click through those and read the PowerPoints. There are also flashcards, which have some of the terms taken from the content in the curriculum manual, and occasionally there are also a review quiz, which is basically a 5-question simple reading comprehension that goes with it. That reading quiz or review quiz, whenever that pops up, that's ungraded. All of the pieces under review do not have grades attached to them. And the last thing is a knowledge check. The knowledge check is intended for either students to look at it themselves. Instructors can use this during class if you feel like you want to use this as sort of like a reading comprehension thing during class, or you can ask your students to print it out or fill it out as a definable field PDF, send it back in. Lots of options there, but essentially it's a comprehension check on the electrical apprenticeship curriculum material.
Interesting.
Okay. possibly the most important piece for a lot of instructors is the next piece, which are the worksheets. These worksheets are basically a digital version of the same worksheets that come in the printed student worksheet or student workbook. These basically are designed so that the questions match as exactly as possible the content that are in the printed workbooks. So if instructors, depending on the strategy that you're using, if you just want to use the system to speed up grading so that the instructors don't have to spend a couple hours a night grading, you can have your students put in all their, fill out their workbooks and then just put in their answers online. There's a lot of chapters that do that. Some chapters, and we can talk more about this later, some chapters offer some remedial opportunities. So instead of just putting in your answers and getting a grade, you can give students multiple attempts so that they can basically, if they get a low grade, they can try again and try to raise their grade, either by averaging their grade or taking the highest grade. But if I click into one of these, just to show you what it looks like, when students first arrive, it'll say, okay, you have this many attempts, and then you can attempt now, and then basically the questions appear similar to what you're seeing on the screen. There's a number of questions in the electrical apprenticeship, as I'm sure you're aware, that have images with them. If there's an image attached to a question, so like a question narrative, that image is actually repeated above every single question that refers to that image. So if there's a page break, or if there's something where it spans from question 9 to question 15, because by default it shows 10 questions at a time, the students will never have the opportunity to lose that image that goes with that question. Okay. After students, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I said very good. That's good stuff.
Good. After students put in their answers, they'll have the opportunity to either go back and check their answers or submit all and finish. Once they submit all and finish, it will give them a grade. By default, it will tell them what questions they got right and what questions they got wrong. It will not tell them what the right answer is. It's just it's a choice by National for the default setting. Those settings can be modified in the future if you wish, but by default it will tell students how many points they got, as well as what questions they got right and what questions they got wrong. Okay. Jumping back to the main class, the last part of each lesson section are the instructor resources. Excuse me. The instructor resources are hidden from students, but instructors can use these as they see fit. This includes a PDF of the instructor worksheets. So if you want to project these on a board, these are the instructor versions of them. So it does include the answer key for it, as well as the rationale and reference material. And basically the instructors can use that as they please. Also, there's an answer key for the knowledge check that showed up earlier, and a full downloadable PowerPoint presentation that is the same material that can be found on the instructor resources section of the IC website, or failing that, the instructor resources website section on the CMS. Okay, and that kind of repeats throughout the entire system. Occasionally, there will also be sections that highlight partners in learning. These are basically IEC national partners that are either classified as partners in learning, or other manufacturers that might have relevant materials that either students can explore on their own or instructors can send to students. These basically are hyperlinks to manufacturer websites that might provide relevant materials. So for example, Milwaukee Tool here sends them to their product page with all of their power tools. Okay. Any questions about any of the content that I've just covered?
The PowerPoints, are they the updated PowerPoints that are available right now?
Correct.
Okay,
yes,
very good.
They are based on the 2019-2020 curriculum. They've been updated with all of the content, and you can see with the background that this is the most up-to-date PowerPoints produced by IEC.
Good.
Yeah, and you can save them to your desktop and edit them if you wanna use them as the basis. This is just another quick way for you to download them.
Nice.
Okay. Okay, so let's talk about how students will kind of see the class. By default, when a class is distributed to an instructor, either the instructor or the training director, depending on how your chapter is going to be enrolling students, will receive an Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of serial keys. Okay, it's intended that each of these serial keys be distributed to each student that belongs in that class. Okay. Once a student has a serial key, there's also a brief instruction manual that basically tells people to go to that student portal that we talked about earlier. You can either get there by going to the main website, ieci.hplms.com, and clicking Visit Learner Portal, or you can just go to ieci.hplms.com/portal, and that will take you directly to the Learner Portal. Okay. The student, if they've never signed up before to the LMS, and most of the time this applies to first-year students, though for your chapter, if students haven't enrolled in the system before, they can enroll themselves. The students will come here, they will click Enroll, and then they can enter in their information. The required information is highlighted with a star in front of it, but the most important information is their first name, last name, zip code, and email address. Okay. The email address is super important because that's going to be their username. The other thing that the email address is important for is that if an instructor sends out announcements, the Moodle system will actually send out emails telling people that there are announcements. So if this is an email that they don't use, it's probably wise to put an email there that they are going to use. Free emails can be made at Google. I know there's several other places that can be made. Outlook.com, I think, has free emails. Yahoo. And basically, as long as they put an email there that they have access to, they'll be able to receive those announcemements. And then the last thing is the access code serial key. This is that serial key that I mentioned earlier that would be handed out to each student. Okay. Once they accept the terms and conditions and hit submit, although you can read through the terms and conditions if you want, basically they're going to receive their username and password, and then basically they can log in and visit the class. Okay. One thing to note is that until the students actually click the Go to Class button in the Learner Portal, they will not actually be enrolled in the class. So most likely, we've had several chapters be the first assignment for their class to basically be to enroll themselves and then make sure that they actually visit the class to make sure that they appear in the class roster. Okay?
Okay.
If the students have enrolled before, if they already have an account, they can actually log in, and then there's a gigantic button that says Add Class, and all it'll require them to do is basically to enter their serial key to add them to that class. Okay? Once they hit the go, and after they log in, and there's going to be a go to course button, and I'm going to switch to being a student here. Basically, students will be able to see all of the materials that they have authorization to see. Okay. The students will also be able to, excuse me, students will also be able to see their own grades. Okay. by the grade section off the side. We're going to talk about how the instructors will manage the grades here in just a second. Okay. Depending on how you're running your classes, certain items might be hidden. So some chapters choose to hide some of these lesson boxes until the class is actually going to be run into those lessons. And so they may actually only see 1 or 2 lessons here, depending on whether or not that's been activated by the instructor. Okay? But pretty much the students will see mostly what the instructors see without the hidden materials. Okay? Let's jump to the gradebook.
Back up 1 second. Did you say, I'm sorry, did you say there's a timer, though? It keeps track of all this time, is the amount of time that you've engaged in the computer, or no?
There is a logging system. The logging system tracks each hit on the site, but it will not track total seat time. Okay, so we can track an estimate of how much time a person takes or a person spends in the class, but there's no guarantee that they've actually spent that amount of time in the seat, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
Okay. Going to the gradebook. The gradebook is set up so that students are all logged into here in a big chart. There's no, in this sample class, there's no students assigned to it. However, with here, each of the automatically graded worksheets will appear in the system. There is a drop down up here that you can use to either look at what a student would see. So for example, if I'm a student, this is what my gradebook would look like. And as my grades are entered in here, I would see what percentage I have for each of these worksheets. And if you want to spend additional time setting up the gradebook so that it matches kind of what your class grade is going to be, there is a gradebook setup activity that will allow you to reorganize, categorize, and weight different items in your class, including adding items that might be graded outside of the CMS. So for example, if you have a lab or something like that, that doesn't have a corresponding automatic grade recorded by the CMS, you can enter those things into here and put in spaces for you to enter in grades for that. There's more advanced features that the grade report can cover. So things like if you click on the header, it will give you a detailed report on who answered what, how much time people take to actually answer questions, what people's answers were, how many attempts there were, and there's more information on that you can find on the FAQs, which we will talk about at the very end. Okay? And that's, in a nutshell, pretty much the CMS. One thing I did mention earlier that I did forget to cover is the announcements section. This class news and announcements, if you click into it, you can make individual posts in here, okay? And if you make a post in here, it automatically blasts an email to everybody that's enrolled in the class, and it basically titles the class with the discussion title and then whatever content that you put in there. So if you want to make a quick announcement to your class to, for example, bring PPE to next class, that's an easy way to do it, to email all your students all at once. Okay?
Very nice.
Now, one last thing that I do want to cover is customization. Okay, so that's basically the class in the box. If you want to start changing some of the settings or perhaps adding your own content, there's 2 things to do. You'll notice up in the upper right, there's this little gear icon. If you click the gear icon, there's this magical turn editing on button. okay? And I call it magical because as an instructor, you're the only person that can do this other than the administrator for the class. When you click that Turn Editing On button, basically you'll notice a bunch of more controls start appearing all over the system. So these edit buttons start appearing, an add activity or resource button appears, and edit buttons start appearing all over the system, okay? So if there's anything that you want to edit in here, you can edit it by jumping into Edit Settings. So for example, if you want to change the number of attempts allowed, you can do it for individual items. There is a way to basically bulk edit some of the worksheets, which we can talk about later, which we also, I believe, discuss in the FAQs.
Yes, there's a video on that.
Yes. There's also, if you want to start adding your own content, so let's say there's a YouTube video that you want to add to your class, you can click Add an Activity or Resource, and then there's a bunch of different options that you have to add content. The two items that are most common to add content, if you scroll down, are the label and the page. Other than the quiz, Moodle treats all sort of graded assessments as quizzes. So whether it's an exam, whether it's a midterm review, whether it's a worksheet, Moodle considers it a quiz, so you'll add a quiz that way. Otherwise, if you're adding content, labels will show HTML content right on the page, whereas a page will be something that you click into to view content, right? So as an example of what a page is, this flashcards item is a page, so I have to click into it to view it. Whereas this item right here is a label because it's showing HTML content right on the page. Okay? And then the last item that I want to talk about in terms of editing your class is this: if you want to hold a synchronous class online. Kind of like GoToMeeting or kind of like WizIQ, the service that is offered with the CMS is called Big Blue Button. It's a fantastic service. It's oriented around holding synchronous classes in the CMS. And what's really neat about it is that you can schedule a class without having to contact anybody else. You can just do it at will. To do that, you're going to click Add an Activity or Resource, and then add the Big Blue Button BN activity. Okay. Typically, what instructors do is that they'll add an activity. So, for example, they'll say September 5th class. They'll have one for each class session that they'll be running in, and then basically you'll hit Save and Display. There's other options in there for limiting people's access or whatever, but essentially this is the most important part. Once you create a class, until an administrator or what Big Blue Button considers a moderator enters the class will be dormant. But once the instructor enters the class, essentially it'll join a class session where you can either listen in via a telephone, microphone, or you can just listen only. Okay. And essentially, there's a chat window on the left, and then there's an area to the center that you can either upload a PowerPoint presentation, or you can jump to the next slide just to use as a whiteboard, right? So if you want to use this as a whiteboard, there's a bunch of tools over here. So I'm just going to draw happy face, right? Just like GoToMeeting, this is all you can record this up here. There's a Start Recording button, and students will actually be able to view this later on by revisiting the class session and viewing the recording. Okay. Some strategies that chapters use for this, if you're interested in, is that if they have a lecture session, they may want to hold the lecture online if they're going to be talking about like concepts covered within the class. And then they may want to actually do some of the math sort of on the whiteboard. Now, you'll have to excuse my mice skills, but the cool thing about this is that if you want to engage students, instructors may ask students to solve the question, and students will basically be engaged by typing in the chat what the answer is to the question. So that's a great way to make sure students are paying attention and being engaged in the class. Asking students questions and having them type the answer into the public chat. There is the option for private chat as well. If a student has a private question for an instructor, they can click their name and do things like that. But there's more information on that, I believe, in the FAQs. Okay?
Very
Do you have
nice.
any questions about the big blue button?
No, it's good. I think
one last thing I do want to mention about the big blue button is that this is all HTML5. So if they have a tablet or if they have like a Chromebook or something like that that won't run Flash, that should not be a problem. They will be able to log in and look at this. They can look at it on their phone, but because the phone is such a tiny screen, they may not have the best experience. Okay? So, with that dump truck of information, that's all that I have, unless there's something that you think I missed, Liz?
Unless you want to mention that there is an attendance feature.
Oh, we can talk about the attendance feature. Some chapters choose to record class attendance in the CMS. There is, basically you have to add it as an item, and let me get back into our demonstration class here. Most chapters basically have one attendance module that they'll add. So they'll turn editing on and say, okay, add an attendance module. We'll just call it attendance. And once you click into it, basically you can add class sessions, okay? So for example, I'm going to add a session tomorrow, I don't know, let's just do noon, okay? Gotta give it an ending.
Yeah.
We'll do 2 hours, okay? And then once the class starts, the instructor can log into the CMS and click the play button and actually just quickly record students' attendance. So they can mark them P for present, L for late, E for exempt or excused, and then A for absent. Okay. Depending on your chapter, you may want to just do it. You know, some chapters scribble it and then record it later on in the CMS. Some chapters do it at the time. The other thing that you can do is that when you go to the report, it will give you a grand total of all the number of presents, all the numbers of lates, all the numbers of absences. Some chapters reduce people's grades depending on how many absences there are. It really depends on how you're going to be running your classes. Okay?
Yeah, I was going to ask that. I mean, we run class 2 nights a week, obviously. With this, I was under the impression it was supposed to just make things easier on the instructor as far as putting grades in or not having to put grades in. Is this supposed to take place of a classroom based on the attendance and all the other things you're talking about? It almost sounds like this takes the place of a night of class. Is that the way it's meant to be?
It's meant to facilitate. It's meant to facilitate the classes. It's not meant to replace the classes. Depending on how your chapter is going to be running the class sessions, you can offload some of the classwork online. So as some sample strategies that chapters have used, some chapters produce videos that contain some of the lectures that used to go on during class sessions. And then basically that allows the in-class time to be fully spent on labs or perhaps homework help, right?
Good, good.
It also reduces the amount of time that instructors have to spend grading items, especially homework.
That
right?
I totally get that, and that's the way I was looking at it from the very beginning. As an instructor, I see it exactly that way. But as you were talking about attendance and things of that nature, I'm thinking, wait a minute, is this taking the place of the classroom? Like, am I still given 3.5 hours of lesson 2 nights a week for my required hours, and then using this in addition to it?
It is not at all intended to replace that time. No.
Good. Okay. This is a supplement to that.
It is meant as a supplement to that, or to make it easier to focus your class time on things that you get more bang for your buck during class. So,
correct.
And to be a file cabinet for content, so that you can have a single source. If you're using YouTube videos or PowerPoints that you've created, you can use this as a repository for all that information and have a single login.
Right. So let's say you're in your classroom and you've built a PowerPoint. You can throw it on the CMS, right? During class, log into the CMS and then pull it up from the CMS so you don't have to stash it on a flash drive or something like that.
I got it. Yep. It's got all the information. It's got it all. And it's also with the students as well. So all that information's there. It's a one-stop shop.
Yes, exactly. You know. So one thing I do want to mention is that for instructors, we do have a FAQ section set up. And you'll notice up at the top of the introduction, there's a hyperlink to it. Okay. But if you go to it, basically it's the main website /FAQs, okay? And then there's a bunch of videos that are there that talk about and will step you through how to do specific things. So, for example, in the future, let's say, okay, we're just going to use stuff right out of the box at first, but later on you're like, okay, I'm ready to start changing some of the settings in the assessments. I can't remember how to do it. Either you can watch the presentation that we're recording now, or you can go to the FAQs, the facts page, click on the video, and just watch a quick refresher on how to do some of these things.
That's very helpful.
Okay.
Very good.
Are there any questions that you have, maybe certain strategies that you're looking to use with your chapter that I might be able to either help with, maybe brainstorm some ideas, anything that you can think of that we might want to talk about?
Well, it's kind of a shame Dante's not on this phone call, because he's the one that's going to be kind of more dealing one-on-one. He's the lead instructor. He was hired for this position. So we're going to have to revisit this. I've made notes throughout the whole presentation. I think the one thing I need to kind of see is how it will be engaged along with everything else that we're doing in the class with the lesson plans that I've created and all the labs. So I think this is a nice supplemental, especially for the grades. Now, so all the grades now, if I have to put them into another database, can I export out of this into another database, like say AMPS, the type of database we're using to house all our grades? Or is that something I'd have to manually do?
So if you go back to the grade book, you remember that drop down I talked about? If you scroll down, there's a bunch of different export options down
good.
the bottom.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. So okay, good. Well, that's really good. So and this is available for all my instructors. I give them individual serial keys.
So the process is you'll let technically there's a submission form on the IEC website, and Patrick, you can talk a little bit more about that. There's a submission form for how many classes that you're going to have, what instructors are going to be on the class. And I think that's done through Smartsheets. You want to talk about that a little bit, Patrick?
Sure. So there is a form that is under the instructor training, instructor resources, I believe, but we can send that out to you via email of a template and form to submit all of the information that ATP would need to make sure that classes get set up, the email to send that information, as well as the estimated number of students. So there is a form and a process for that we can send to you separately.
Okay, good deal.
Yeah, and so basically each class will have its own set of serial keys. We always send more serial keys than you'll probably need. We usually send at least five more than are requested. And if you have any extra serial keys, you feel free to just erase them or set them aside because you don't need them. Once a serial key is used, though, basically it's going to be attached to that student and nobody else will be able to use it. Okay?
Got it. So if some of the instructors are really inclined to want to get into this and want to use it, I can assign those instructors, set their classes up, and engage them. Other instructors, maybe it's not meant to be for them right away. We'd have to maybe give them a little bit more introduction to it. So I can have some instructors on board. We don't have to have all our instructors on board. Is that
Yes,
correct?
that's totally up to your chapter how you would like to onboard people. We found the greatest success in choosing a small number of instructors, maybe even one instructor that might be a power user, and sort of getting them started first.
That's what I'm thinking. Yep. And then other people will follow the lead.
Exactly. And then that power instructor or, that small subset of instructors can be a great resource for the people that are a little bit less inclined to using the online system.
Correct. Because I know I can identify some that they're just kind of a little skittish, a little standoffish when it comes to things like this. And it's good stuff. Once you embrace it and you get to know it, it becomes your friend and it's good for you. But until then, you're somewhat, it's like, right. I don't know if that's for me. Okay.
Well, the other thing is that, I mentioned earlier about how customizable the system is. The platform that we're using is called Moodle, and it's an open source platform. There's lots of different tutorials that you can find around the web. And one thing that you'll notice if you do search the web for Moodle is that there are tons and tons and tons of settings for each activity that you can add to the class. And that can be somewhat daunting when you're first getting started, right? So using it just start straight out of the box, we have all the defaults set up. But once the power users, we find once they start to embrace it, they start changing things to fit your chapter, and that's kind of the intent behind this. Is that we're trying to be this system. We tried to make it as flexible as possible. The Moodle platform is very flexible, and that way we're going to try to make it fit your chapter as best as possible.
Nice. Okay.
Great.
Okay.
Well, Adam and Liz, I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much for the tutorial, and Bob, thank you for being on the call as well. And like we said, we'll make this available for all chapters to view. So thank you for the time and doing this overview.
Thank you.
Not a problem. And Bob, I think you said his name was Dylan, is that correct?
Dante.
Dante. Okay, I'm sorry. If you and Dante, maybe sometime in the future after you start digging your hands into this, or maybe you get your your power instructor involved in this, if you would want to schedule a short brainstorming session to sort of either solve issues or talk about some strategies that either other chapters are using, or because we have a lot of knowledge about what all the different chapters are doing. When it comes to individual content, the content of the chapter is their own property, so that's not something that we can share with you. You'd have to contact that chapter. But if it comes in a strategy of how to use the LMS or CMS, we'd be happy to share that with you, or happy to point you in a direction of who to talk to at a chapter to see how somebody's using it.
No, that's fantastic. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
Thank you so much, Adam.
All right. Thank you very much, guys.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Bye-bye. Yep. Bye.
Bye.